They framed me for a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme, but they made one fatal mistake. They locked me in the room with the evidence. Now, the hunter has become the hunted, and I'm about to burn their entire world to the ground. The heavy mahogany door of the boardroom clicked shut, sealing me into a silence so thick it felt like drowning. My boss, Marcus, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of practiced disappointment. Around him, my colleagues, people I had shared coffee with, people who had laughed at my jokes and leaned on me for deadlines, avoided my gaze. They were staring at their hands, their notepads, the grain of the polished wood, anywhere but at the person they had collectively decided to sacrifice. "The numbers don't lie, Elena," Marcus said, his voice dripping with a faux empathy that made my skin crawl. He slid a thick white folder across the table. Inside were spreadsheets, fabricated timestamps, and falsified invoices, all meticulously doctored to point a finger directly at me. It was a masterpiece of corporate betrayal. I had spent 6 years building this department, pulling all-nighters, and fixing the catastrophic mistakes of the very people sitting in this room, only to be turned into the scapegoat for a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme I hadn't even known existed until 48 hours ago. "I didn't do this," I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. I looked around the room, hoping for one ally, one spark of conscience. "You all know I didn't do this. Sarah, you were the one who authorized those wire transfers. David, you signed off on the vendor audit." Sarah didn't look up. She just adjusted her glasses, her fingers trembling slightly. "I trusted your oversight, Elena. I never thought you'd use my signature as cover." The audacity of it was breathtaking. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, replacing the panic that had been gnawing at my gut for days. They weren't just firing me, they were building a narrative for the police. They were feeding me to the wolves so they could keep their bonuses and their clean reputations. As I listened to Marcus outline the disciplinary measures and the pending legal action, I realized that I wasn't just losing my job. I was losing my life as I knew it. And as Marcus reached for his phone to dial the security team, I noticed something that changed everything. A small, flashing red light on the corner of the table. The recording device they were using to document my confession. "You're making a mistake," I said, rising slowly from my chair. I didn't look at them anymore. I looked at the window, where the city skyline glowed with an indifferent electric pulse. "You're making a very big mistake." I turned toward the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew that if I walked out of that office building, the security guards would be waiting, the police would be called, and my digital footprint, the one they'd spent all week sabotaging, would be enough to bury me for years. I had to leave now, but as I turned the handle, I felt the sharp prick of a hidden camera lens tracking my movement, and the distinct, chilling sound of a lock clicking into place from the outside. The lock clicked, a heavy mechanical thud that echoed through the room like a gunshot. My heart skipped a beat, then hammered against my chest with a rhythm of pure, unadulterated terror. I yanked the handle again, throwing my weight against the wood, but it was useless. It was a secure office, designed to keep people out, but now it was a vault designed to keep me in. Marcus chuckled, a low, grating sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Sit down, Elena. We have so much more to discuss, and we really don't want to cause a scene in the lobby, do we?" I turned back to face them. The air in the room felt thin, recycled, and suffocating. I realized then that this wasn't just a framing, it was an entrapment. They needed me to sign something, a confession, a document stating I'd acted alone, before the authorities arrived to take me away. It was the final piece of their perfect crime. I scanned the room, my mind racing through exit strategies. The window was floor to ceiling, triple-paned and reinforced. It wasn't going anywhere. Then my eyes landed on the fire sprinkler head above the table. It was ancient, the type that responded to heat or direct impact. I looked at the coffee carafe sitting precariously on the edge of the sideboard, then at the heavy glass vase holding a decorative fern near the corner. You think you've won, I said, pitching my voice to sound defeated, hoping to draw them in, to make them let their guard down. I took a step toward the table, my hands trembling as I reached into my bag, ostensibly for a pen. But I wasn't reaching for a pen. My fingers closed around the jagged edge of my heavy, metallic, work-issued key fob, a remnant of a security clearance I was no longer supposed to have. We don't think, Elena, we know, David chimed in, leaning back in his chair, his arrogance peaking. The evidence is insurmountable. You should just make this easy on yourself. Sign the document and maybe, just maybe, the board will go easy on the criminal charges. I looked at the document in the center of the table. It was clean, printed on crisp, high-quality paper. It was my death warrant. I took another step, my breathing shallow, focusing on the distance between me and the main overhead light panel. If I could shatter the casing, I could create a distraction that would darken the room for just enough seconds to make a move. You really believe I'm stupid enough to sign that? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Marcus stood up, his face hardening. You don't have a choice. I lunged, not for the door and not for the document. I lunged for the heavy coffee carafe, hurling it with every ounce of frustration and fear I'd bottled up over the last week. It shattered against the wall with a deafening crash, showering the room in porcelain shards and scalding liquid. In the ensuing chaos, I threw the heavy metal fob at the light fixture, the crackle of electrical sparks immediately plunging the room into a deep, jarring darkness. Cries of confusion erupted around me. I didn't wait. I scrambled over the table, my hand catching on something sharp, a paperweight, a stapler, and I swung it blindly at where I remembered the emergency release panel for the door being. My hand hit the metal, and I frantically pried the plastic cover off, slamming my palm onto the override button. The door hissed open, spilling the bright, blinding light of the hallway into the room. I bolted, my footsteps thundering against the sterile carpet, my lungs burning. I didn't look back until I reached the service elevator. I punched the button, glancing over my shoulder to see the boardroom door swinging wide. Marcus stood there, his tie undone, his face twisted in a mask of primal rage, but he wasn't alone. Standing right behind him, silhouetted by the flickering emergency lights, was a man I recognized from the security feeds. A man who definitely wasn't an office guard, and who was currently holding a suppressed pistol leveled directly at my chest. The sight of the suppressor, that dull, matte black cylinder, froze the blood in my veins. This wasn't about corporate embezzlement anymore. This was about silence. Permanent, absolute silence. The man holding the weapon moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a professional, his eyes locked onto mine with a terrifying indifference. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he was following orders. He looked like he was finishing a chore. The service elevator dinged, the doors sliding open with agonizing slowness. I didn't think. I threw my body into the cramped metal box and slammed the button for the basement parking garage. As the doors began to close, the gunman took a step forward, his arm extending, the muzzle of the pistol tracking me like a compass needle finding north. A single, muffled pop echoed through the hallway. The bullet tore through the frame of the elevator doors just as they sealed shut, the sparks dancing like fireflies in the dim lighting of the shaft. I hit the floor, curling into a ball, my breath coming in jagged, desperate gasps. The elevator plummeted, shaking as it descended, and I forced myself to crawl to the emergency panel. I had to get out, but I couldn't go to the main exit. They'd be waiting there. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a violent, buzzing intrusion. I pulled it out, terrified it would give away my position, but the screen was glowing with an encrypted message from a number I didn't recognize. "They're watching your cloud. Ditch the device. The ventilation shaft in the basement leads to the drainage tunnels. Run." My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. How did they know? Who was they? I stared at the message, the gravity of the situation sinking in. I wasn't just a scapegoat. I was a loose end in a machine much larger than Marcus and his lackeys. I reached the basement level and the doors slid open. The garage was a concrete cavern of shadows and flickering fluorescent bulbs. I crept out, sticking to the periphery, my heart thumping against my ribs. I heard the hum of the elevator behind me moving back up. They were coming for me. I sprinted toward the maintenance sector, my heels clicking far too loudly against the cold floor. I found the service hatch, a rusted, heavy grate tucked behind a stack of shipping pallets. I pried it open with a desperate surge of adrenaline, the smell of damp earth and stagnant water rushing up to meet me. I scrambled inside, pulling the grate back into place just as heavy boots echoed through the garage. I pressed my back against the cold, slimy wall of the tunnel, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Footsteps stopped directly above me. I could hear the muffled voices of Marcus and the man with the gun. "She's not in the stairwell," the gunman's voice was calm, chillingly conversational. "Check the perimeter. She has nowhere to go." "Find her," Marcus hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and greed. "If she talks, we're all dead." I waited for them to move on, but they didn't. Instead, I heard the distinctive, metallic click-clack of a flashlight being turned on, followed by the heavy sound of a boot kicking the shipping pallets aside. I turned to crawl deeper into the darkness, but my hand brushed against something soft and yielding. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head, my eyes adjusting to the pitch-black void of the tunnel. I wasn't alone in here. A faint light from a discarded glow stick illuminated a small, makeshift camp, and as my eyes adjusted, I realized I was staring at a wall covered in photos, dozens of them. They were pictures of me, eating lunch, walking to my car, sleeping in my apartment. And right in the center of the wall, there was a fresh Polaroid, snapped not 5 minutes ago, showing me standing exactly where I was, hiding in the dark. A soft, raspy voice whispered from the shadows just inches from my ear. "You're late, Elena. They've been waiting for you to disappear for a long time." The breath left my lungs in a sharp, jagged hitch. I spun around, my back scraping against the rough, mossy concrete of the tunnel wall, my hands flying up in a defensive posture. The flashlight beam from the garage above was still dancing across the ceiling, but down here, in the sub-basement bowels of the city, the darkness was absolute. "Who's there?" I rasped, my voice barely a tremor in the stagnant air. "Someone who has been watching them watch you," the voice replied. It was dry, like parchment rubbing against wood. A pale, thin hand emerged from the gloom, clutching a heavy, blackened flashlight. The light clicked on, not a bright beam, but a filtered, red-tinted glow that barely cut through the shadows. The man holding it looked like a ghost of the corporate world I had just fled. He wore a rumpled gray suit, his face a roadmap of deep lines and exhaustion. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who had been hiding in these tunnels for decades. He held out a small, metallic drive, the kind used for cold storage data. "Marcus and the others," he whispered, gesturing to the wall of photos. "They're not the ones in charge. They're just the cleaning crew. You were the auditor, Elena. You were supposed to find the holes, but you found the foundation. That's why you're marked." "I don't know what you're talking about," I hissed, glancing back at the grate. The muffled voices from above were getting closer. I could hear the heavy thud of a boot hitting the concrete floor of the garage, right over my head. "I just want out." "There is no out anymore," the man said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me want to shrink away. "You crossed the threshold when you walked out of that boardroom. You're no longer a person to them. You're a variable that needs to be deleted. But I have the code to their mainframe. I have the proof of every transaction, every offshore account, every life they've traded for profit. I couldn't reach the upload point alone, but you have the clearance codes. He shoved the drive into my hand. It was ice cold. Why me? I demanded, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Because you were the only one who didn't take the bribe, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. And because they're currently tearing the grate off that wall. As if on cue, the heavy, rusted iron of the hatch groaned. A shaft of brilliant white light pierced the tunnel, blinding us both. Heavy boots crunched onto the gravel of the drainage path. I didn't see the gunman, but I heard the familiar, rhythmic thwip, thwip of a suppressor being threaded onto a barrel. Elena, the man whispered, grabbing my shoulder. You have two choices. You can die as their scapegoat, or you can run to the end of this tunnel and plug this drive into the junction box. If you do, you trigger a global leak. If you don't, they kill us both right here. The grate clattered to the floor with a hollow metallic bang. A silhouette framed by the light from the garage filled the entrance. It was the gunman, and he was no longer looking for me. He was looking at the camera, a small obsidian black device held in his left hand, broadcasting our location to whoever was left in that boardroom. Found you, the gunman said, his voice echoing with predatory glee. The old man pushed me toward the abyss of the tunnel. Run, Elena. Don't look back. If you stop, they win. I turned and bolted into the dark, my feet slipping on the wet sludge, my heart screaming. Behind me, I heard the man in the suit stand up and shout something, a defiance, but it was cut short by a sound so loud it rattled my teeth. I kept running, tears stinging my eyes, clutching the drive against my chest like a prayer. The tunnel began to slope upward, and in the distance, I saw a sliver of light, a manhole cover leading to the city streets. But as I reached it, I felt a sharp, burning pain in my side, and I realized with a sickening jolt that the man hadn't been screaming in defiance. He had been screaming in agony as he tried to stop them from following me. I reached the ladder and looked down. The tunnel was empty, save for a single discarded shoe and a streak of dark, wet crimson leading back toward the entrance. And then, from the darkness below, a cold, mechanical voice spoke. Not the gunman, but a voice over an intercom system that shouldn't have been in a sewer. Elena, you're holding the evidence. Now please, look up. I froze. I slowly raised my head toward the street-level light, and my blood turned to ice. Peering down through the circular grate of the manhole weren't police officers or concerned citizens. It was a ring of high-tech surveillance drones, their red optical sensors fixed firmly on my face, their weapons already tracking my every heartbeat. The red dots danced across my chest like a constellation of malevolent stars. The hum of the drone rotors vibrated through the steel ladder, a low-frequency drone that rattled my very teeth. I realized then that the code I was holding wasn't just a collection of spreadsheets. It was the digital heart of a system that controlled everything. If I died, it died with me. If I exposed it, I triggered a collapse that would shatter the world those people lived in. I didn't think about survival anymore. I thought about legacy. Target acquired, the mechanical voice chimed from the drones, its tones sterile and devoid of human nuance. Subject, Elena Vance. Disposition, immediate termination. I looked down at the cold drive in my hand. It was no larger than a thumb, but it felt heavy with the weight of thousands of ruined lives. The man in the tunnel had died for this, and I would be damned if his sacrifice ended in a dumpster behind a corporate skyscraper. I didn't climb the ladder to reach the street. Instead, I jammed the drive into a small, weatherproof maintenance port located on the side of the junction box, a relic of the city's old, analog infrastructure that the modern drones hadn't been programmed to intercept. As the connection beeped green, I realized the man hadn't just given me data, he had given me a kill switch. Upload in progress, the console chirped. 10%, 20%. A bullet sparked off the ladder inches from my hand. The gunman had reached the bottom of the shaft, his silhouette tall and imposing against the faint light of the garage. He wasn't rushing. He knew he had me trapped. He raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. 50%, 60%. "It's over, Elena," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the damp concrete walls. "You're a ghost, and ghosts don't get to tell the truth." I stood my ground, leaning against the cold wall. I watched the progress bar, my heart rate slowing to a steady, rhythmic beat. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was a variable they hadn't accounted for, and I was about to become the error that crashed their entire system. 90%. The gunman fired. The sound was deafening, but it wasn't aimed at me. He shot the junction box. Metal shredded, sparks showered the floor, and the terminal groaned as it blew apart. But it was too late. The final packet had been sent. I heard a symphony of notification pings, not just from my phone, but from the streets above. The city above me erupted. I could hear car alarms, the sudden silence of the city's power grid failing, and then the frantic, panicked voices of thousands of people suddenly receiving the data leak on their personal devices. Every offshore account, every hidden payoff, every secret murder, all of it was live.